Scott is going to kind of build on some of this conversation that we've had and talk about a model that we've been kind of putting forward about what a dashboard might look like within the context of these maturity model assessments. So Scott's here on behalf of Grant Thornton. Many of you know our dear friend of the Case for Quality, George Seraphin, who would be here today, but had to sacrifice his time here today because he's on vacation on this little island called Hawaii. So we're delighted to have Scott with us.
Thank you very much. For those who I have not introduced myself, my name again is Scott Ugran. With Grant Thornton, I lead our what we call risk analytics within our healthcare and life sciences industry practice. Set up here. So, as Stephanie mentioned, this actually fits perfectly in alignment. I'm very fortunate the fact that the key speaker, the panelists, it all leads into basically what I'm going to be talking about and kind of how we can wrap things up together in a nice little bow and package and make things presentable and actionable. And then also it ties into the afternoon session as one of the items, the 4 items that will be called out, kind of line right into this topic. So again, it fits really nice in, and I think I was set up prepared for success based on the people ahead. So in essence, we talk about envisioning a maturity model dashboard. It's all about driving continuous improvement. How do we have information? How do we use data to drive that continuous improvement? And as I step back, and I've talked to some of you in this room and others as we've kind of been thinking about this, is really the challenge is that data is everywhere. It was mentioned, or in the keynote speaker, data is everywhere. But how are you using? How are you leveraging? How are you taking that to be in a situation that it can be used for continuous improvement? In addition, many of the systems that you have implemented to date aren't really built to be in a situation where they're all talking together or they're giving you information in a real-time manner. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball in the sense that some of that core infrastructure, be it your QMS or your MES or your ERP packages, haven't been designed or architected when you implemented them to kind of give you that continuous improvement information. So that's one of the things you have to work through from a challenging perspective. How do we overcome that? And we'll kind of talk about some of the ways to get there. So, in addition, probably, one of the challenges we've heard is it just takes too long for me to get my information together. And we were speaking with one of our clients and they said, you know what, don't tell anyone, but I have at each plan, I got someone that's gonna spend an entire day just pulling information together and then sending it up to me. And in essence, when I get it, it's already outdated. But every month, each plant's spending a month to get this data. And that's not the people beyond getting information together. In addition, we have leaders that will say, I understand I'm in compliance because I can see the big sirens. So I know I'm in compliance, but I'm not quite sure, am I really producing good stuff? I don't really know that yet. And I can't tell from the material I get information because it's all compliance focused. It's about the red sirens going off, but I'm not really understanding the picture of, is my product of a high quality? In some of those same situations, you'll run into situations where metrics may be defined differently by products. So if I'm gonna look at something across my enterprise, how do I really tell what's what? Because I'm looking at apples and oranges. So again, you got challenges with data, you got challenges with source system, and the last thing is, we're talking about quality of your products, but there's another quality that ties into that. It's quality of data. And in some organizations, we've talked to people, well, I don't trust my data, so how can I trust these metrics? So again, that's kind of the backdrop to what we're going to be talking about here in the next about 20 minutes here as we go through this. So as we lay out and listed here are, both sides of me here, benefits of what a mature quality management system is. And what I want to highlight is, how does data and analytics feed into those benefits for some of those key topics? So again, quality beyond compliance. If I'm looking at metrics that are talking beyond just that compliance, I think it was put earlier, we talked about compliance may be that floor. Well, how do I get the metrics? How do I get the information to push it? So I'm not just focused on those pure compliant items, I'm focused on overall quality. My next item around talks about, enhance the patient, customer, and employee experience. And very fortunate, you guys talk about culture over and over and over again. It's kind of lead into one of the things we'll dive into. But again, able to assess culture. Luann asked the question, how do I measure culture? And I'll give you an example of how we can measure culture, because in essence, that's going to be an indicator of the quality maturity system. If I've got that ability to understand my employee experience. Again, The next two around predictability, flexibility, alignment, even consistency. Again, it's if I've got data, metrics, information that I'm looking at on a recurring basis, maybe not just looking at it on a monthly basis, looking at it on a daily basis, or even throughout the day to understand what's happening, you're going to be able to understand, am I alignment with the business, right? Cost of quality was one mentioned earlier today, and I'll highlight that again here. Do I have the transparency where people can see and understand how we're keeping score and how we're doing, how we're trending? So again, if I tie these items, this is about using your information in an effective manner, putting information to make sure that you're confident with the data, because you may be able to say, you know, if I'm going to look at this, I kind of know my data is okay. If it's 90% accurate and complete, I can make business decisions. But as you really want to push the needle, you got to get your data up to that 99.9% confidence. I understand what's coming in. I understand how it's being transformed. I understand how it's being leveraged and how it's being tied with other aspects of my environment so that I can give a complete picture, confident to our organization, regulators, our customers, that we develop quality products. As I kind of look at this maturity curve here from an analytics perspective, and I'll use some analogies to kind of highlight it. You know, I'm sure everyone in the room here does some level of hindsight. In essence, you have metrics, you look at them, they're telling the score. The analogy I give is, you know, you look in the newspaper to look to see if your team won last night. If you're on the East Coast, you're not going to get the score from the West Coast. It's well, I could sort of see, I saw what they did 2 nights ago, so I'm keeping score, right? I use hindsight, I keep score, I have an idea of what's going on, but I'm not really doing more than just understanding and keeping score, okay? As you move up to the foresight level, again, part of that maturity curve is foresight is now you're kind of a part of the game, right? You're predicting what's happening. If you're looking at metrics like your CAPAs, or you're looking at, and you can understand that the time it takes to resolve CAPAs and how many come in, you can start to predict things. So in essence, you're a part of the game and you're managing that game, which is great because now you're not just keeping score, you're a participant trying to create an outcome. As you move up to insight, and this is again, the farthest level in the sense that now, can I take information? I'm not just keeping score or trying to play the game. I'm trying to win the season. I'm looking all of a big picture of here, how's my season going? What do I need to do? I want to get information from maybe different industries or look at cross products or look at my competitors and bring information from different areas. So I'm not just looking at a siloed metric. I'm looking at organizationally or industry-wide to really position myself for long-term success. So again, these are all items around how do I move from just getting information to ultimately intelligence. Okay. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the metrics because we've talked a little bit, they've called out. Again, there are different levels of metrics that are part of this. In essence, there's ones you guys have had working groups that define some metrics. There are different metrics that also come out of other industries that could be applicable. And then ultimately there are indicators that are going to drive quality. So based on time, I'm not going to skip through these because I think a lot of these things are topics that have been discussed before. So what I'm going to show you here right now, we call this a framework. And what I mean by a framework is this is something that can work and evolve based upon your organization. What is the right way to handle things? Garth, you mentioned pillars earlier. I think you called out that you had 3 pillars of information that you guys look at. Well, we've identified six taxonomers right here that highlight 6 different areas. But the idea is how do you get information so that you can look at it and you're not worried about, I'm not worried about putting this every month, putting together and patching together and putting in a PowerPoint presentation, but it's already outdated. How to have information in a manner that gives you visibility across different key aspects. And those key aspects could be different based upon the maturity of your products, the maturity of organization, the availability of data. So in essence, what I consider this is again, it's an art of the possible. It's a vision. It's something that we've been fortunate enough that some of you have provided feedback to our framework demonstration environment. So these are some slides that kind of walk you through some key things. Again, the idea of this is things to think about and how do you present that overall picture around quality and maturity and ideas. So what you're seeing here is we've identified 6 areas. your pre-production, production, post-production, which kind of ties back to that Xavier white paper of metrics. And then the other ones we brought in, because we felt as we talked to people, they really became important to give an overall picture. And the bottom corner over here, culture. And I'm going to dive into culture a little bit further. But how do I have an indicator of culture? And then how do I bring in the costs that I think were getting called out earlier? The cost of poor quality, as well as the value of quality, what investments are being made in there. So now if I look at this, I have a view, I can slice this by product. I could slice this by geography. I have different ways that I can understand how I'm performing right now. And I'm bringing that insight because I'm not just looking at one siloed metric, I'm looking at a bunch of different things. And if you drill into any of these, I think it was called out earlier, I think Jackie said 20 to 25 KPIs that you guys are actively measuring. Well, those 20 to 25 KPIs would be the underlying components to this. So how do you build up what goes into that pre-production gauge and have that flexibility to figure out how do you use those metrics? But the idea is to give yourself an overall view of what we're looking at here. So one of the things, let's see, fortunately, Cisco was one of our volunteers, our guinea pigs, to actually give us some feedback on where we're headed. And I asked the question, we showed you 6 items, our six gauges, and asked him, what would he see from his perspective? What are the priority? How would you rank the 6? Well, he didn't answer that question. He kind of went off and gave us his own. He said, I'll tell you what my top 4 are. So in essence, the first thing he says, culture, number 1, okay? The second one was, well, if you look at, you got pre-production and production, maybe those kind of fit together as something we'd call development life cycle, okay? So we kind of adjusted that and put together a development life cycle. And then third one was the customer experience. That was the post-production, but then tied in some of the ideas around product safety and usability and give it an overall view on the development life cycle, and then tie the 2 costs together, so we got to 4. But the idea is, again, flexibility, a framework, depending on your organization, your maturity, your needs, how do you present things in a way that you can make decisions and take action around it? So thank you for the feedback on that, because again, give you some visibility on that.
Anyways, so I think one of the things I appreciated about guys are relevant to each organization. So, yep. And maybe down the road, most organizations at some point in time might align or norm around a set of metrics. But for the meantime, one of the things I think we saw a lot of yesterday at Toyota, something that we saw in how they manage their suppliers, which if you really look at this model, it's very similar, right? You guys manage your suppliers in some way, but it's really focused on these KPIs that are relevant to that product, that supply base, whatever's going on there, a lot of transparency and visibility, and a lot of continuous feedback. So one of the big cultural pieces that we touched on yesterday that we didn't get to today that they used to manage is that visual management, right? Is everybody seeing, and are they seeing it at the right time, at the right frequency to be able to take action? To me, and I think what I saw there was a way to address that concept of the individualization of the KPIs, which instead of going and focusing, I have the right KPI, it's how am I really trending towards the target or success that I've met for that KPI, and what's reflected is your movement in that direction. At least that's what I understood, not necessarily the actual KPI.
Absolutely, and again, one of the important things here is red, green, yellow is indicative of you, what you feel is red, green, yellow. And I think it was talked earlier about how maybe you move your targets up over time, or maybe for one product, red, green, yellow is very different than a more mature product. If you have a new product coming to the market, you may have different standards or goals you're shooting for. So the idea is, how can you create a flexible environment so you can manage your business and obviously give yourself the ability to understand how things are progressing across different plants or products or across the different metrics to kind of pick out what is the issue. Am I having issues because I have supplier issues, or is it because of cultural issues? Is it because of what's happening? And you can understand those things. And then to dive in a little deeper to culture, and fortunately, this is when we have a little deeper, and it was brought up over and over again. One of the things we looked at was, how can you define culture? And Luann challenged, how do you measure culture, right? That was one of the questions. So in essence, what we've come up with is 8 key pillars for culture, right? Items like leadership empowerment and sense of the team and overall ability to understand the capacity of change. So the idea is with having these 8 pillars, and again, maybe in your organization it's 6. I know some of you guys have cultural surveys. What are those pillars? And then how do you assess it? Are there pulse surveys? Are there things you can get from a training system or learning system? Understand, how do you put a framework that you're continually measuring culture and being able to understand? Because if I want to measure it, I can maybe see that one of my plants maybe have deficiencies in culture. Maybe there's turnover there. Maybe there's been leadership changes. How can I look at this and help me tell a story to understand culture? And how does this change over time? We know culture doesn't change instantaneously, but again, if I'm tracking, measuring it, then hopefully we can crack the code to say, how does culture have a correlation with overall quality? So just wanted to close here with a couple maybe questions to the group to get perspective. And I know obviously some of you guys are far more advanced and have mature analytics programs going on. And again, we have a spectrum of the audience here. But maybe even we think about is, as an organization or as an industry, can we use quality metrics to move the needle? And how are you doing that to improve safety and quality? The next question around is, what are those barriers to establish that you're having? And then lastly, can as a group, and this leads in exactly to the topic for this afternoon around aligning those metrics. So I'm open to feedback from you guys on those questions or thoughts or comments at all.
So I think that in regards to aligning and standardizing, I've certainly gone down this road in wanting to have the set of measures that to rule them all, if you will. It's really a Tower of Babel from each organization. And I think currently where we are on the road, and I don't know if this will stick, but we're discussing it from the analytics perspective that there's domains. So I mentioned a few of them: safety, effectiveness, reliability, availability. There's at least 3 others in the analytics team. Those are the 4 that we've been focused on within the maturity model. And then we leave it to if that's just the high level taxonomy, it then is for those organizations to decide how is it that they're rolling up those particular measures. And even that is challenged, because if you're dealing with a small organization that has 1 device, it might be very easy to collect those measures. Mm-hmm. But then how do you aggregate it for a large organization like Luann's, where are you talking about that by product, family of product, facility, the entirety of the organization? So we're still trying to grapple through that. But I think that it's the aligning and the standardizing is going to have to be done at like very broad brush levels, and that the individual metrics are going to have to be something tailored for each organization.
Yeah, and I think to me, what I think was advantageous of what was presented beforehand when we saw it in-house was the idea that it's not about aligning and standardizing the quality metrics. As George said, we're seeing it's exceedingly difficult, and there's just too much relevancy, but there is a way I think that we can all collectively align on a way to visualize what's coming out, right? So that we can all interpret whatever's going in there in some meaningful way, but allow that flexibility for what's relevant in the organization. And to our standpoint from an agency piece, that gives us a lot better insight and a lot more continuous data of what's going on. So we know when the system's working the way it's intended to be working. And back to maybe some of the later topics in discussion, right, the safe space piece, how do we start managing through that, utilizing that focus, right, that visualization, that extra confidence that you saw it, we saw it, you're working on it, it'll be addressed. Let's all move on.
Any other comments or questions?
The examples you showed of a dashboard around culture were really interesting. Could you give just a couple examples of how you might go about measuring some of those elements? Yeah,
so a couple of them. One is, pulse surveys, quick questions that go out to a group of people, and then obviously you stagger them could be staggered, so you're not hitting the same people with the same questions. But the idea is by having pulse surveys, you can get a question or two that will allow them to respond in the areas you want to cover. The second thing is, we drill down, some of them get into education and learning and certifications. So those are things that possibly come from a learning system or an HR system where you have some information, you understand where are people in their tenure versus where they are from certifications. So the third way, the broader way is sometimes you start out with is more interviews to understand the organization. So typically we'd say you start with interviews, understand what things are, and then go to pulse surveys so you can start to gauge over time how things are moving through that. And then again, there's various ways you can represent. I showed the spider chart because it gave a nice little view of things, but there's all different ways you can kind of represent that and kind of understand how that impacts things, because you're really looking for the correlation. That's the key. And with culture, you're not going to probably see it right off the bat. You have to start to look at it to see, is there a correlation between culture and some of the other key indicators? But we felt by tying that together, it gave you another piece to the puzzle.